In Unit 3 of Lean Agile Product Management, we're going to talk about an experimental approach to product development. By the end of this class, you'll be able to discuss outcome-based planning. We'll talk about hypothesis-driven development. You'll be able to start using experiments to test your hypotheses. We'll cover A/B testing and the culture it crucially enables, and we'll talk a bit about small batches and why working in small batches is so important. So, in a lot of the literature about Agile and the Agile frameworks, there's a lot of discussion on work breakdown and estimation in the context of planning. So we have planning meetings, we take work, we break it down. And you'll often see this language around taking what's known as epics, which are very high level capabilities, and then themes for those epics, and then breaking those epics down into what's called stories. So stories are individual units of work that can deliver value to the customer. There's this well-known and commonly used story format that you can see here as a persona. I want, and then the what that you're delivering, and then so that, and then the reason why you're doing it. And then a lot of the work that people do is around tracking these stories as they get done, how well we're moving, how fast we're moving, when we'll be done, doing burn up charts or burn down charts, which we'll talk about later, to predict when we'll be done. And I think it's easy in this kind of discussion to miss the point of what your job is as a product manager. So we will cover this stuff in more detail later on in the class, because you do have to do it and it's important. But I think it's important also to take a step back and think about what we're trying to do here as product managers. And this goes back to what we talked about a bit in Unit 1, which is projects versus products. A lot of this planning stuff, epics and stories and estimation and planning when we'll be done, is actually project management activity. It's thinking about the scope of the work we're doing, how much it's going to cost to deliver it, and the time it's going to take. And as I say, you've got to do that stuff. But fundamentally, what it's not focusing on is what we care about as product managers, which is the impact of our work and the value of our work. Now, that is captured in the stories, the so that bit, but it's not captured at a higher level. And we really need to start by thinking about what are the outcomes we're trying to achieve as product managers with the product that we're building and with the features that we're building in measurable terms. And typically, the outcome is going to be discussed in terms of its impact, which is usually about changes in behavior. So what you're ultimately trying to do as a product manager is change the behavior of your users so that you get money. And that money may come directly from users. It may come from other people who pay you money to change user behavior, and we call those customers. So the customers are the people who are giving you money. The users are the people who are using your software. Those may or may not be the same people. If you're building enterprise software, for example, usually the customer is the procurement department, and the users of your software are not the people who are paying you. That's also true for two-sided business models. For example, Facebook, the users are the people who are using Facebook. They're not paying you money. The customers are the advertisers who are paying to advertise on Facebook. So it's an important distinction between users and customers. But the crucial thing is what we're trying to do is change user behavior, and that's how we make money. And so it's really important as a product manager to quantify in measurable terms what you're trying to achieve. What's the outcome we're trying to achieve? What behavior change do we want to see? How are we going to measure that behavior change? A good way to think about this behavior change is helping people get better at solving some problem they want to solve. There's a great book by Kathy Sierra called Badass, Making Users Awesome, which talks about the importance of helping people become experts at something. You're trying to make your users really awesome at something. And what she says is that experts are what they do. So given a representative task in the domain, A badass performs in a superior way, more reliably. So in as much as you're trying to help somebody solve a problem so that somebody gives you money, maybe them, maybe someone else, think about how you can measure how they're performing and how reliably they're able to achieve that performance. Those are the kind of things you need to be thinking about as a product manager. So step one is defining the outcomes you're trying to achieve in measurable terms. Probably you're trying to measure changes in behavior. And then what you've got to do is achieve that outcome somehow. Now, maybe it's by building software, but maybe it's not by building software. And honestly, if you can achieve the outcome without building software, you win. Software is expensive to build, it's expensive to maintain, it becomes more expensive to add features over time. So if you can achieve that outcome without building software, brilliant. And there are many ways to do that. However, the reason you're probably here is because you want to help teams build software, and that's okay too. But just bear in mind that what we're ultimately trying to do as product managers is maximize those outcomes we're talking about, the impact, and minimize the amount of work we have to do to achieve those outcomes. So you want to do the minimum possible amount of coding work to achieve those outcomes. And you're not going to get that right the first time. It's very easy to get really into your solution and have a solution bias and get really into all the things you want to do and think about all the amazing features you're going to build. And you really have to snap yourself out of that and be like, this is great. How can we cut scope as much as possible and do the bare minimum to try and maximize that outcome? So that's really important as a product manager, to be able to flip into how can we cut scope? How can we reduce scope? How can we simplify this? How can we make this easier to build? What things can we avoid doing and not do because they're not actually germane to solving the problem at hand? And that laser-like focus on simplicity and minimizing the amount of work we do to achieve the outcome, that's one of the most important characteristics that you can have as a product manager. So because people are so focused on building things and what they're building and how amazing what they're building is, you need to have tools and exercises that you can do to get people focused back on the outcome. And there's a really great tool that I love called impact mapping. Impact mapping is the title of a book by Gojko Adzik, and it's a very simple collaborative exercise that you can do with a small team of people, including developers, support, yourself obviously as a product manager, UX people, other key stakeholders. And the idea is to start with the outcome you're trying to achieve. So in this case, this is a financial services example. You're trying to reduce the transaction cost by 10% of making a financial transaction for your financial services company. So always start with that. And that can be quite difficult to get people to agree on what is the outcome in measurable terms we're trying to achieve. A lot of people miss that part, but it's super key to this. And then you've got to think about the people who can help or hinder you in achieving that outcome. So that's the next level. In this case, we've got the German settlement team, the traders, IT operations. Then the next level is how those people can help or prevent you from achieving that outcome. So in this case, processing important exceptions faster is one way that the German settlement team could help reduce transaction cost. And so there's a whole bunch of different possibilities here. And then the final step in this map is the what, the features, the what are you going to do things. And what you can see is there's a whole bunch of different possibilities here for features. Now, in the kind of framework agile approach, you write a story. And the story is just picking one path through this map. And in a lot of organizations, that's done upstream by analysts, and they might not even think through all these different possibilities. And that's hugely problematic because what you're getting is one path through this map. It's like you've taken an amazingly complex picture and shrunk it down to a single pixel. So we really want to avoid that. We really want to think about all the possible ways we could achieve the measurable outcome. And this kind of exercise is something you want to do as a team in front of a whiteboard or in front of a sticky note, whether that's a a virtual or a physical one, probably a virtual one these days since we're all remote. And so you want to get the team to sit down, write stickies and stick them up, and then discuss them as a team and come up with as many possibilities as you can. So this is a divergent generative activity where we're coming up with a ton of different possible ideas to achieve the outcome. And then you'll have an evaluative convergent step where you pick one of these possible options, and you want to pick the one which you think has the highest chance of achieving the outcome based on the information you have, with the lowest possible amount of work. So remember, we're trying to reduce output, minimize output, do the least possible work. So you want to think about which of these is going to be the easiest to do, and also which of these is most likely to achieve this outcome. And then you're not going to go and actually do it. What you're going to do, particularly if it's a complex feature that's going to take a bunch of work, or if you're relatively unsure about whether that thing will achieve the outcome, spoiler alert, the chances are pretty low that it will, you want to design an experiment to test your hypothesis. And this is where we get the idea of hypothesis-driven delivery. What you have when you have an idea for a feature or a product is a hypothesis, and we can express that using this template. We believe that building this feature, the feature at the end, for these people, the stakeholder in question, will achieve this outcome, the measurable outcome we're trying to achieve. We'll know we're successful when we see some kind of signal. And what you've then got to do is design an experiment to test that. How do we design experiments? That's fundamentally about user research. It's about going and gathering data from real users to test our hypotheses. So user research is what we use to design and run experiments. And we'll talk about that in a bit more detail. But that's the high level picture of what we're trying to do as product managers: define measurable outcomes, and then think about possible ways to achieve that outcome, and then run experiments to test if our ideas will actually achieve that outcome or not. There's a whole bunch of tools like impact mapping that we can use to think about outcomes. And one of the things you'll do in a discovery exercise is apply a bunch of these tools. You might well use impact mapping in a discovery workshop. That will be a very appropriate thing to do with your team. Another tool that I want to introduce you to is called Working Backwards. And this is a tool that was developed within Amazon. And the idea is that as part of discovery, what you'll do is think about the press release that you're going to release when your product comes out, and actually write that. So write the press release. Describe what the product does, why it exists, what are the features and benefits, and think about your product from the user perspective. Why would a user care about it? Write a frequently asked questions document. So think about what comes up when you write the press release, and then as a team, you're discussing a whole bunch of things about the press release. Capture those and make a frequently asked questions document. Define the customer experience. What's the product going to do? Build mock-ups of the screens. Think about how people are going to use the product, and maybe even write the user manual for that product as well. So these are things you can all do up front, and some of these you can do as part of a discovery workshop as well. And this is a great way to focus people on the outcomes we're trying to achieve, what the product means for users.